come to sing for tomorrow? I want to wave back at you. Okay, so we started in a party mode, and we will be discussing very serious questions because the topic of our panel discussion is the future, and the title of our discussion is which fucking problem do we solve first? So we start with assuming that we all are aware of a number of problems that need solving. And I'm not sure that we will be able to solve them, but we will definitely discuss various perspectives. And the guests with whom I'm sitting here are all connecting academic perspectives with practical knowledge, and they come from various spheres. So first I would like to introduce them in the order of sitting. So I will start with Attila Schillinger, who is the director of the Strategic Communication Master's Program at the University of Oregon, and he is professor of practice, who is dedicated to sharing his more than 25 years of international corporate and sustainability communications experience with students. So we will talk about sustainability communication. And next to Attila, you can find Atoosa Kasirzadeh, who has given our keynote earlier. Atoosa is an adjunct chancellor's fellow and director of research at the Center for Technomoral Futures at the University of Edinburgh, and she has been the director of the Alan Turing Institute. Welcome. And next to Atoosa, you can find Alexandra Köves, who is an ecological economist, an associate professor at Corvinus University of Budapest, and is the head of the Ecological Economy Research Center. She is teaching and researching ecological economy and degrowth, one of my favorite topics. And you can find two of her podcasts, one in Hungarian, one in English. So just Google for them. They are very, very useful and cool podcasts. And next to me is Kamill Kószó, who, as an AI innovation manager and MBH bank, ensures a design-driven approach to AI transformation. With a background in business, IT, and a decade experience in service design, he co-founded a business design consultancy called Meet Perspectives. And I'm Eszter Szép. I teach arts at Milestone Institute, and I really wanted to have various perspectives here from business, economy, IT, AI, communication. So we will discuss the future, and my first question is that in your fields, when the topic of the future comes up, the problems and solutions of the future, like what is the time scale in which you are thinking? What is the future for you? And please grab a mic, everybody can have a mic, and the bravest can start. Sandra seems to be the bravest. I nominate you to be the bravest, Sandra.
Okay. Hi everyone, nice to be here. So in the introduction you said I'm an ecological economist, and yes, I do research in degrowth as well. Degrowth is an alternative field where we think that the current economy is running on an unsustainable scale, and part of the reason is our complete addiction to growth, and that the planetary boundaries cannot simply sustain this kind of speed of growth that we need. And therefore we need alternative economics. We need to find how to provide well-being for all within planetary boundaries. And this is something we haven't had. So when we think about the future, for example, my research technique is often called backcasting. And backcasting means that you need to start working your way from the future backwards. Because if you start kind of extrapolating the current trends into the future, you realize you're not getting a scenario that you actually want. Because we're not, in no way can we find the numbers that tell us that we're on the right track. Only the billionaires kind of find these narratives, but no other empirics can. So we can turn this logic backwards and say, okay, so what kind of future do we want? And how can we imagine that and find the common narratives that we can have, and then work our way back and say, what can we do today in order to move towards that future? So the future we work with when we use this technique is something that's far enough for us to release our imaginaries. Actually, degrowth's slogan is decolonize your imaginary. So it means that you need to start thinking of a different future. Now, when we use this technique, it needs to be far enough so that you don't fall back all the time like, no, this can't be done. It can't be done. So you can keep thinking what can be done and then work your way back and say, what can I do now? So it's normally nowadays, it's 2070 that we use. But 15 years ago, we used 2050. But so it's far enough, but we will live. Or me, probably not. But, most people will, and or at least our children. So we have this commitment, but we doesn't drain ourselves or lock ourselves into our current existence and current way of thinking.
My area of research and teaching is on societal impacts of AI, and obviously there are so many different areas in relation to societal impacts, like there's a environmental impact, climate impact, that requires like a longer horizon consideration. I am personally more concerned with the near-term future, like 5 to 10 years from now. The reason for it is that for those kinds of considerations, we would be able to run experiments and measure how AI is changing like specific aspects of society. For example, if you want to know whether generative AI is making information ecosystem better or worse, to be able to answer to this question, we need to look into the current uses of generative AI on Twitter, on like different other platforms, and then see whether this technology is really impacting people in a significant way, whether the circulation of misinformation and disinformation really impacts the way people make decisions, or is it something that people just like consider and reject? So I'm more interested in like thinking about the stuff that we can measure here and now. But of course, the kind of like a broader background, the broader kind of like perspective is like, how can we make AI to benefit society for the future generations? In order to answer to that question, I think we first need to figure out whether we can make the current AI systems to bring better for the current people who are living. Because then I need to kind of like measure the impact of the systems on different kinds of generations, etc. Then I think about like the impacts of AI until like 2030, 2035. So the next like decade is like the kind of a perspective that I take when I think about future.
I think coming from a bank, we have to answer questions like, okay, how much money can we make now using generative AI? How much money can we save? And one of my role is to bring a different mindset and to bring the broader horizon. So let's think about, let's say, how can we change the people's relation to money, and how can we impact the way people spend their money, they think about investing, etc. So from, in the bank, there's the short-term thinking or pressure, but there also it's a role to bring in the long-term way of thinking and perspective.
So there's a lot of talk about technology and AI today, and I'm coming from the US, right? And we're fascinated by technology, and everybody is looking at AI as the next shiny object. What bothers me, not just as a communication guy, but as somebody who worked in business for a long time, is that we keep repeating the same patterns and the same mistakes. What do I mean? Social media, great, it connects us. But look at some of the other destruction and negative impacts that it has. Cryptocurrencies, I'm not against crypto, okay? I'm not an investor, but I'm not against it. But look at the emissions that crypto mining creates. Anybody from Belgium? crypto mining has an annual emission equal to Belgium, and it's growing. AI has a similar impact on the environment. So my issue is, when do we start innovating without shooting ourselves in the foot? We got about 5 years to cut emissions like 50% by 2030. And we keep pushing and increasing it by adopting new technologies with no regard to the environmental impact, not talking about the people impact. So my issue is, when do we wake up? How can we, communication people, start that awakening and come back to something, or well, not even come back to something, but start something that is not repeating this pattern? There's the, everybody knows the law of the hole. When you're in a hole, stop digging. I think that's what we need to do first. Stop digging.
So, as you teach, how can you represent in your teaching practice this idea of stop digging or changing stuff when you are working with students who have a lot of anxiety but also have a lot of desires that are related to keeping on digging?
That's right. People, especially in the US, because the society there is so divided, they don't agree on anything. So even in terms of language, and I think you addressed a lot of that, like how do we talk about technologies? There's a lot of discussion about climate change and sustainability, but how do we even call it? If you start calling it climate change and you start calling it green, you lose half of society, simply because it's not their domain. It doesn't belong there. So how do you even talk about it? We call it pollution. People understand that. You call it clean. People understand that. But then you come to a language that, yes, people understand, but then other people disagree with you, including some of my students. They're like, so why do we oversimplify the language? Why don't we name what needs to be named? Emissions are emissions. Don't call it pollution. I'm like, yeah, but people don't get it, right? Emissions are not coming out of the tailpipe. It's pollution. That's what they... Anyway, so there's a real divide between the geek language that we speak with corporations, sustainability, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Who understands that? So, that's a bigger issue.
Atoosa in the keynote already addressed the naming issue with the naming of intelligence and capabilities, and I was wondering if in your fields you have experienced or you think that naming does influence how we picture the future and what solutions you consider good naming techniques or bad naming techniques. Anyone?
Well, as I said, degrowth says decolonize your imaginary. This also means that you need to find the language to talk about alternative futures, because we are being fed a lot of garbage, garbage in, garbage out. We are being, told that things are okay and, things can go on. We can just start using electric cars and, instead of other cars. We don't need to think about the mobility and why we need mobility and how we do mobility and why we do tourism and how to do it in a better way. We're not talking about that. We're talking about what kind of energy we use for that car. So we're constantly being promised that things can change without us changing the narrative, us changing the language, us changing anything. So I think that's the dominant narrative. You just lay back and wait for technology to solve it. But technology is not going to solve it. And the reason technology is not going to solve it is because behind every technology, there's a social vision. We just had a publication recently about a backcasting we did with AI experts. And basically it was really interesting because once you take them out of the current way of thinking, they start talking about entangled AI. They start realizing that, for example, technology, the way we use AI is mirroring our consciousness, is mirroring human consciousness. You can use a lot of technologies for shit, and you can use a lot of technologies for a lot of good things. It's just our consciousness that either can imagine how to use it for something good or not. And language comes into that because our imaginaries feed on narratives and our actions feed on imaginaries.
So this social vision is super important in shaping AI, in shaping service design and banking. And in your keynote, when I asked you the question, you already started, Atoosa, talking about this social vision of using AI for good. And I'm really interested in this. So how do we change the social vision in all the spheres that you are going? This is an endless task, but can you just give us some good examples of good social visions, positive future thinking?
I think that there are so many examples. So one of the things that I've been learning about recently is like one of my colleagues, she is working with some refugee camps. And so in the refugee camps, one of the big problem is that it is very hard for the people, like the social workers who are in these refugee camps, to understand some children who can't really like write and read. And so they're using some versions of language models. So they're building this very interesting like applications that is helping for the social workers to understand the children. And just through development of this app, apparently like a lot of the mental issues, mental problems in those camps, I mean, the mental issues are immense, but some aspects of them are already like kind of like really reduced because you have now this tool that is helping people to resolve a very important real problem that people are like dealing with. I think in climate change, and like I'm not an expert in that, but I also hear that there are like a lot of startups where people like are trying to kind of like find ways to reduce the emission of the AI tools that are being trained. So basically like using other sources of energy for training some specific AI systems for developing like specific tools that are helping again real problems. So I think there's been some studies, people show that there are some, I mean, we are all living in like developed world, so some of the real world like global problems even are not in our face, but there's been this study that showed like in some countries in Africa, for every like 5,000 person, there is one medical doctor. And so then people have been developing these applications based on like some good fine-tuned versions of some language models that actually help some people there to kind of like find some basic answers to some medical questions. So I think if we just like kind of like try to really understand the problems and think about what is a solution and then team up with some good technologists who have this social understanding and don't just want to develop tech tools for whatever, but they have a goal, they have a particular vision, real problem they want to resolve, we're going to end up seeing lots of very meaningful, innovative applications of AI. And I'm not at all a techno, like a techno solutionist, so I think actually developing good AI systems requires really understanding social problems, but AI can also help us in many, many domains to resolve some of those problems. And that's like a sweet spot that we have to like really understand and kind of dig deeper into.
I just want to reflect on one thing. While I love listening to Atoosa, I think you're talking on a different level. Because when we're saying, yeah, it's fantastic that we have an app for translating in refugee camps, what I'm talking about is having no refugee camps. So this is a technological fix for something that's normal in our social visions to have the refugee camps. So basically, when we are developing technologies, we can develop it for a fix, fixing it so that we can go on in a world where we don't actually want to live in. So I think it's very important that we have a look at this and say we're not developing fixes, we're developing tools for systemic changes. And for these systemic changes, this is where you need new social visions. Because yes, it's great to track your emissions and use AI for tracking your emissions, but it's even better not to emit, yeah? To have technologies that help you not emit. So I think these are the different levels.
Yeah. Just a quick answer. So I think there are two different projects that we need to run in parallel. I totally agree with you that it's really important to kind of like get rid of all of the like. It would be such a great ideal society in which we would live in, where there were no refugee camps. It's great, right? The reality of the world is that we have those refugee camps, and people who are living in refugee camps, they're really suffering, and we need to have some like early fixes because we care about the lives of those people. So I think these two projects can actually go hand in hand. So we shouldn't like lose the vision of like the very hard questions that we need to resolve. But then for the short run, like in order to reduce the suffering, minimize the suffering, we can just like think about real practical problems here and now. Then still like the long-term global vision would be just to minimize the sources of those problems.
Another slightly different vision. I've been thinking a lot about this. Like we develop technologies and they're wonderful, great. But, you know, talk about the pandemic, hopefully behind us. But, you know, if there were vaccines never tested and you don't know the side effects, would you take them? Same thing with technology. I'm like, you know, we don't really test it. We don't really think about what will be the side effects. And then we launch it and fix it later on. That's kind of the techno-solutionism. My proposal is techno-preventionism. And prevention is proactive prevention. That comes from mainly from peace studies and conflict resolution, where you look at systems and you develop new designs and new technologies and new solutions with some of these outcomes in mind. You can't predict everything. But I think when we started dealing with AI, we knew that it needs incredible computing power. Where does that come from? You have to plug the computer in, right? That requires energy. Where does energy come from? Coal plants? That's not good, you know? So you need to look at that. And I'm pretty sure that with all the good intentions, we could do better. So my proposal is, and I don't know if it makes any sense, why don't we go back to patents? I had a startup. We filed a patent. We failed, okay? So I think I'm a reasonable startup guy because we failed. But that's not the point. The point is, when you file a patent, why don't you need to file a life cycle assessment for environmental impact or for social impact? Why don't we do that? Go back to the basics of innovation and reward that first and then require it. So I think there could be solutions, systemic solutions. We just keep repeating the same patterns.
I just want to involve Kamill in this conversation, coming from this startup and service design background. And so all the three of you have raised this radical change of our dreams. So when you work with a client, do they have these dreams of radical change, or does this even come up in the service design background when you are designing a new app or whatever?
No, I mean, it's a really hard topic because sometimes I feel like we were pushing it, like, hey, we should think about these as well, and then we are talking to a CEO who is worried about, okay, but I need to do these numbers, and so it's a really hard discussion. But I think this is our responsible to escalate these conversations. But what we do in MBH Bank is actually invite people to start a conversation about AI, invite them, educate them, and inspire them how they can use AI to start develop their own language, how they use it, how they talk about it, and what they can use it. And I think it's a super low-level topic, and we discuss like very broader topics. But I think that's the main thing: to invite stakeholders, invite people who are in this topic and who can actually be in the change. And because if we are just talking about like theories and then these people have no idea what AI is, let's say, first we have to invite them, teach them, educate them, inspire them, and then start a conversation with them and start having a dialogue together, and not just theoretically talk about like what should be the future.
And are they open to this?
Some of them yes, some of them not.
Very diplomatic. I love talking to you. Okay, so anybody else has anything to add?
Well, I think educating people by a bank is by definition something that's like, okay, they have a narrative, they want people to buy into that narrative. But I mean, if we're not talking about AI, but for example, we're talking about blockchain technologies, you can use blockchain technologies to actually democratize finances. And I'm not sure the banks are that happy about this idea of using blockchain technology, not for just cryptocurrencies, but actually democratizing the whole system. So, we're saying that yes, okay, CEOs need to look at the balance sheet, but why don't we start talking about how CEOs must look behind the balance sheets? It's something that we don't question. We're not questioning these things, It's like we're talking about this, CEOs look at the balance sheet. Yeah, fine. But why don't we question if that's the only thing they must look at? Because we don't dare, or we don't have the imagination that we might actually want to live in a world where CEOs have different perspectives as well.
Yeah, but when I said inspire, engage, invite to conversation, educate, I meant the CEOs as well. So there are different stakeholders, and I know, but that's what we can do.
Something that sometimes drives me crazy. You guys are on LinkedIn. Who else is on LinkedIn? You see all that talk about leadership, right? Defining leadership, examples of leadership. Everybody's a leader. So my question is, when we know we have just a few years to meet the most important goal of humanity ever, to cut down our emissions, to have a future, can you call yourself a leader, or anybody who doesn't do anything about it and feels no moral responsibility? Only a balance sheet. That's not good enough, right? Anyway, I just wanted to throw it out there.
Does anyone want to respond? Okay, so Attila, before your leadership question, which we will just throw in the air and you can think about it during boring concerts here, you mentioned twice, you repeated twice that we should stop repeating the pattern. So my question is to each of you, from your perspective, and I would like to start with Sandra with the degrowth idea. How is it done? And my question to Atoosa is how does AI function in a post-consumption world? Is there such a thing? Can we find a balance between technological innovation for good things, which have ecological footprints, whatever raised by Attila, and also this desire to have very different dreams, because AI is a current dream. So how can we meet the technological and this techno-nature divide that we inherited from the Enlightenment?
I mean, Atoosa's first question was addressing this. How do we distribute the economic gains coming from technological development? And not just how do we distribute it now, but how do we think of the past as well? how could it become? Is it everyone's? Is it humanity's achievement, or is it just one person's? Because once we start accepting that the teacher who was teaching Elon Musk at school, I don't know, mathematics, you know, it's her achievement as well. It's, you know, it's the doula who helped him come to this world. It's her achievement as well. And once we start thinking like that, we realize we can't put divisions on whose technology it is and who can benefit from it. So we need to start thinking. But if we start really deeply thinking about this, we realize that we need a completely different idea of how the economy should work and could work. And once we realize what Attila is saying, that we have limits. If we can't emit more, we have limits. The economy now can't handle this idea of limits. Now, once we have these limits, and then we say, okay, but we want well-being for all, because the doula was also there. So we want well-being for all within these planetary boundaries. We realize this is a strong distributional problem. Like, distribution is in the heart of it. And this is why I'm really delighted that Atoosa's first question was about this. So we need to start tackling distributional problems as well as, okay, so what's well-being? How does AI provide well-being to us? Who does AI provide well-being? What part of my well-being is linked to AI? How can it help redistribution? And how can it keep track of planetary boundaries? And how can AI and technology be and remain within planetary boundaries? So I think these are the crucial questions.
Yeah, I think I can't agree more with everything you said, but also just like to add another kind of like dimension to this whole way of ecological thinking. So history of AI is like so fascinating. It's just like full of these very interesting like AI researchers we don't hear about their name, but they try to think about the relation between AI and humanity and society and economic systems in very different ways. So there is this interesting movement, I think in 1970s, that happened in California. Unfortunately, for various reasons, didn't become as successful, but it was exactly a movement that was called ecological thinking. So a couple of researchers, like AI researchers, suddenly, I mean, they were in this like hippie movements, and so they started very seriously thinking about the relationship between human and AI. That is the thing we have to understand. We shouldn't think about, oh, this AI system as this independent being suddenly self-improving, becoming so powerful, killing us. That is a wrong way of thinking about AI. AI only should be understood in relation to ecology, in relation to social environment, in relation to people. And for various reasons, complex reasons, these visions of AI that were tried and tested did not become the popular visions of AI that we endorse today, right? Still today, ecological thinking, even I discovered ecological thinking this year, despite the fact that I'm teaching about history of AI since 5-6 years ago, because this is not a thing that you read about in like mainstream visions, theories, perspectives about AI. But then you end up saying, oh my God, these people really try to say that the relation between human ecology, even utopian visions about AI should be understood in relation to human. So we shouldn't start to think about, oh, like this post-humanistic world where AI is empowering all of humans. That is great. That is not how we have to think about post-human AI. We have to think about post-human AI as, okay, we're gonna live in this future world. AI and humans are living together. What does that really mean? And that is not how we ask, how a lot of powerful billionaire people ask and think about questions. So just going back to what you say, this whole different way of thinking, the ecological relation between AI and humanity, and just starting from there, right from the beginning, is like the most important like first step to take. Yeah.
Can I just share with you that, for example, in this backcasting we did it with AI developers, AI researchers, people who weren't necessarily involved in the social aspect. But once we asked them, okay, so in 2070, what kind of world do you want to live in, and what role does AI play in it? Straight away, they talked about the ecological vision, yeah? Not in their own jobs, because we live in a world where which is still this enlightenment, this Cartesian vision of like, we take things apart and then, you know, people can just focus on the parts rather than the system as a whole. So this kind of systems view, but once you start asking people, but what is the future you want to live in, they start using the systems view. So we're continuously asking the wrong questions, using the wrong language.
Can I just add, and again, the low-hanging fruit, at least for me, is stop doing certain things we're doing. Number one is going back to language. I struggle sometimes with my students when I explain that sustainability is not a journey, it's a destination. We know our limits. We know the planetary boundaries. We need to start living within those boundaries. Yes, we need to get there, but in my experience, the largest corporations use sustainability as a journey, as an excuse to explain that it takes forever to get there. No, we don't have time, right? And then another example is saving the planet. How many times you heard that? Look that up. Save the planet. We're not saving the planet. We're saving ourselves. Katharine Hayhoe, the #1 climate scientist in the US, she's actually from Canada. She wrote a book about it, and it's titled Saving Us. We're saving ourselves, right? Or anybody from Norway? I love Norway. I love Norwegians. But Norwaying is another level of greenwashing. Look at any sustainability country ranking and list. Norway is in the top 5. One of the most sustainable countries, 90% EVs, all that. But take into account, how does that happen? Where is it coming from? Oil and gas, export. So basically we're exporting emissions to the rest of the world, at the same time being a very sustainable country. You need to look at that together. There are no borders for emissions. They don't stop at your border. There's no clean Norway when you do that. There's only a clean world. So think about that. These are just 3 examples, right? There's so many more.
You guys have been nodding. Do you want to add anything? Okay, so Sandra, you've been talking about, and so everybody has been talking about systemic view in relation to AI and humans and AI and nature, or a global view of delegating your emissions. So my question is, I'm still struggling with phrasing it, but Sandra, you were asking individuals and they reveal their individual dreams. And I know that Atoosa has been involved in some legislative issues. So how, in very practical terms, can we connect individual dreams to legislative things? The background of my questions is that a few days ago we had a day on the apocalypse. It was a very happy day. And the last question of that very happy day was by a girl sitting there who was an activist with Fridays for Future. And basically what she was saying is that she is depressed and tired of being an activist. And I feel that quite often we delegate the responsibility to activists and then they burn out. So do you know any good practices where the individual dreams are connected to legislation or connected to corporate interests?
Well, I think the social dialogue that that the bank is trying is one way. I mean, basically communities are there to kind of support our individual achievements or individual how do you call it? Yeah, well, trying to do like individual actions, and I think another thing that we need to change is this idea of linearity, and that we're sure that if we do like this, then that will happen. You know, we don't know what will happen, but if we at least have a vision, what kind of systemic change we want, and do anything. There's no such a thing as doing too little. I mean, we didn't know that, you know, a child sitting in front of the Swedish parliament, you know, with a really simple sign is going to start a kind of a massive movement. So there's no such a thing as doing too little, because we don't know what little is going to add up. So I think we are waiting around, but we're waiting around because we think it's a kind of a linear process. If you know, we all have to wait for everyone to join in, whatever. But it's not a linear process. So let's start doing it. Let's start doing it. I don't believe that as a consumer. I think it's a very bad message that you as a consumer should start, and you know, because it's pushing the responsibilities to individuals, breaking them up into small units, and making them feel, you know, they have no power over things. So, but if you are, as a consumer, if you're trying to do something, you will realize what kind of systemic problems you run into. And then, as a citizen, or something in your job, you can start actually like supporting systems changes rather than just doing one little thing. So, you know, I think the responsibility is there for all of us, but this responsibility is not for us to solve stuff, but to kind of shoot impulses to the system and say, we want change.
In the service design methodology, there is this tool called stakeholder mapping, and I really like it. It's when we are identifying, okay, who are the stakeholders to this question. And service design, back in a few years ago, they started to, there are many like really good service design agencies, and they have connections to big companies like Adidas or whatever, like big companies, and then they are like consultants. And what they're doing is like, they're bringing these different stakeholders to the business strategy planning process as well. So it's not just about, okay, we should think about all these when it's about a communicational project and how we can like say, okay, we're really green, but when we're planning our business strategy, can we think about, okay, the animals around us, or the planet, the water, the trees, etc., and not just the customer. So what we do is like, service design is promoting the human-centered design, but it's just about humans. And what these agencies were doing, what we were trying to do in Hungary is like to bring in these perspectives as well. But maybe I'm skeptical, or I had some really bad experiences, but like we need incentives to incentivize these decision makers to actually think about these and then implement all these different perspectives in their strategy as well, and not just we need tools, we need programs, but we also need incentives to make the change happen.
Yeah, I think this topic of systemic change is such an ambiguous notion, because on some level systemic change is like, let's change capitalism. Like, okay, people tried for decades, like, let's be honest, like, it's not easy. No one knows how to do this. No one has like a better vision, like a very practical vision for what is going to come next. And I say that having practical vision is extremely important. As a person who grew up in a country where people went for revolution, they did not have a practical vision for what they want after, and then they could not get to a better point. So it's really important. I think the older I get, the more and more I realize having practical visions for systemic changes are really important. And maybe the easiest starting point is just going back to your question, like remaining depressed is not like really a good option. Yeah, we should accept we are not living in rosy times. But then the good thing is that we are all like very well connected, and there are so many opportunities, so many things we can do as collectives that our parents could not do. And I think that is really great. It means like there are a lot of potential, a lot of opportunities, and just keeping the sensitivity, like this idea for, I want to do a small change that ideally would go towards this bigger systemic change, but I can't go for the systemic change right from the beginning. It's just not gonna work. So just like trying to be sensitive, picking some topics, and trying to like be active, I think that's so important. You can be active at university, outside of university, in high school, but just cultivating this culture of we are not passive citizens. We care about some social problems, world problems, and we're gonna do something about it. And I think just having and living that vision can motivate other people to live that vision. And this is gonna be done only when a big group of people are gonna do it. So I think for me it's like, start locally, remain sensitive, and just know that, yeah, these are not rosy times, there are so many problems, but there are so many opportunities, and we can just create all of these opportunities, and like, why not?
In fact, I think economically speaking and society-wise, we're living through the largest opportunity we ever had. Maybe the last one, but the largest one. And I just think that, your question was about individuals and policy. I don't have a lot of hope for policy because policy these days doesn't really go ahead of public opinion. And I think we all know we're not a good sample of public opinion. I think public opinion is somewhere else. But, I think we're left with a market mechanism for now. And we need to get the best out of that mechanism. And so my hope is that renewables keep growing. Just yesterday I was reading that instead of spending $1 trillion on renewables and fossil fuels at the same time, which was a couple years ago, now we're spending $2 trillion on renewable energy and $1 trillion or less on fossil fuels. Whether that continues or not, I'm not an expert, but I think I see some hope in some of those market mechanisms, simply because renewables are cheaper, they're more reasonable, they're better in a number of ways. I think we can do so much more with existing tools and technologies than we are doing today.
I learned so much from your responses. Thank you so much for this panel, Kamill, Sandra, Atoosa, and Attila. It's been a pleasure talking to you. So let's give a round of applause to our panel. I think.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for being here with us. This has been the Think for Tomorrow venue for 6 days. It's been powered by Milestone Institute, a school that provides personalized education to gifted teenagers. And this has been our last program. Okay, we will have some films coming up, but the last discussion. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank everybody in the organizing team, our stage manager, Melly, our manager of everything, Adam, our marketing team, our technicians, Alex and Gergő, and the content managers, and everybody at Milestone Institute for enabling us, and SZIGET allowing us to do this. Have fun and think about the planetary boundaries.